If that woman gets a single cent, I'm walking out. Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade, leaving everyone in stunned silence. My son, the boy I raised with love and care, had just betrayed me in front of the whole family. The lawyer paused, glancing between us as if he didn't know how to continue. But there was no going back now. I sat there, the weight of his words pressing down on me, but I didn't show it. I had learned long ago not to wear my heart on my sleeve. This wasn't about money for me. It was about respect. Respect that I had given up years ago, hoping it would come back. But now, it was clear, it wasn't coming back. Victoria, standing beside Richard, was smirking as she watched the chaos unfold. She had been a cold presence in my life from the moment Richard married her. I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and calculating. The woman who had slowly pushed me out of my own family. I remembered the first time I'd met her. She had put on that sweet smile, but I knew even then, something wasn't right. That sweet smile had been a mask, and now, her true nature was fully exposed. Richard, who had once clung to me as a child, had grown into someone I barely recognized. He had always been so close to his father, but after his passing, the distance between us had only widened. At first, I thought it was grief. I understood grief. But this was something else. It was as if I was nothing to him now. The house that had been filled with the sound of our laughter, our lives, now felt empty, echoing only with the remnants of what we used to be. It wasn't the house I mourned, it was the family. The family that, over the years, had slowly turned into strangers. Richard's eyes met mine briefly, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. The man I had given my life to raise, the man who had once come running to me when he scraped his knee, was now the man telling me to leave. I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. The world didn't care about my tears. Richard turned back to the lawyer, and with a few more words, the will reading continued. But I couldn't focus on what they were saying. My mind kept replaying Richard's words. If she gets a share, I'm walking out. I had lived my entire life giving. Giving love. Giving care. Giving everything. And now, at the end of it all, I was being pushed out like I didn't matter. I had worked so hard for this family. I had made sacrifices I would never get back. But none of that seemed to matter. Not to Richard. Not to Victoria. The lawyer cleared his throat, signaling the end of the reading. But I didn't need him to tell me what the will said. I already knew. I had been left out. Left behind. As the room began to empty, I felt the weight of the betrayal like a stone in my chest. Richard and Victoria exchanged a few quiet words, probably discussing their next move. But I didn't care. What I cared about was how they had treated me. How they had treated my love and sacrifice like it was nothing. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, but my mind was clear. I was done being their doormat. I was done being silent. As they gathered their things, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. The one I had kept hidden for weeks, knowing that the time would come when I would need it. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was my power. The power I had let slip away for too long. I walked up to Richard, my steps measured, deliberate. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I simply handed him the envelope. His eyes widened, and he looked at me, confusion flickering in his gaze. But I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned and walked out, my heart heavy, but my head held high. I had learned a long time ago that silence could be more powerful than words. And now, I had a choice to make. I could let them think they had won, or I could take back what was mine. The ball was in my court now, and Richard and Victoria were about to find out just how wrong they were to think I would go quietly. I sat, alone in the dimly lit living room, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The echoes of Richard's angry words still reverberated in my mind. If that shrew gets a share, I'm walking out. I had spent my life giving, sacrificing, and now, I was the one being cast aside. The years of love, of patience, of raising a son who once clung to me for comfort, now seemed like they meant nothing. I couldn't help but wonder where it all went wrong. When had Richard changed? I knew life had taken a toll on all of us after Henry passed, but I never imagined it would come to this. As I stared out the window, the weight of the situation finally settled in. I had been too passive, too forgiving, and now my son had turned his back on me. The realization stung, but I had been raised to endure, to keep going no matter how difficult things got. So I did. But now, with everything laid out in front of me, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. I had to act. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about respect, the respect that had been slowly chipped away by Richard and his wife, Victoria. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to feel like I was living in their shadow. But it seemed like that's exactly what they wanted me to be. They wanted me out. They wanted the house. They wanted control. I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. I had spent enough time silently suffering, quietly watching as my own son became a stranger to me. I would no longer sit idly by while they made decisions for me, as though I had no voice. I walked over to the table, where the will still lay, the words on the page burning into my mind. My heart raced as I thought about what Richard had said. He had shown no remorse, no understanding of the years of care and love I had given. Victoria's smirk flashed in my memory. That woman had been playing a game from the moment she stepped into our lives. She had found a way to manipulate Richard, to turn him against me, and now it was all coming to a head. I didn't need to confront them immediately. I had learned long ago that patience could be more powerful than rage. I needed time to think, to plan. I knew they thought they had won, but they hadn't seen the truth yet. They hadn't seen what I was capable of. The silence of the house grew louder, but this time, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like an opportunity. I walked to the drawer where I had kept something hidden for a while. The envelope. I had been holding on to it, knowing that one day, I would need it. Today was that day. I took a deep breath, holding the envelope in my hand. I knew what it contained. The truth. The proof of everything Richard and Victoria had tried to hide. This wasn't just about money. It was about protecting my dignity, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. As I held the envelope, a sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't going to beg for my place in this family. I wasn't going to plead with them to understand. Instead, I was going to show them exactly how wrong they were. I took a moment to steady myself before walking towards the door. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. But Richard and Victoria were going to have to face the consequences of their actions. I would make sure of it. I walked back into the living room, holding the envelope tightly in my hands. The time for silence was over. I would make my move soon. And when I did, I would no longer be the invisible mother in the background. I would be the woman who took control of her life, no matter what Richard or Victoria thought. The next time they saw me, they would know I was no longer the same. I had been pushed to the edge. But now, I was going to fight back. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to make a scene. I simply needed to show them who I was, and who I was becoming. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I woke up the next morning, the weight of yesterday still heavy on my chest. I had handed them the envelope, but that didn't mean the fight was over. In fact, it had just begun. As I sipped my coffee, I stared at the envelope on the table. The truth was inside. The truth that would change everything. Richard and Victoria thought they had everything under control. They thought they had won. But what they didn't know was that I was far from the helpless, passive woman they believed I had become. They had underestimated me, and now, I was going to make them regret it. I had always been the quiet one, the one who didn't rock the boat, who kept my emotions to myself. But that was before I had lost my husband, before Richard had turned his back on me, and before Victoria had entered our lives with her cold, calculated smile. That was before they had pushed me too far. I stood up, walked over to the envelope, and opened it. Inside was the proof I needed. The DNA test. The truth about the money that had been secretly siphoned off. The truth about Richard's manipulation of my accounts. I had known for months that something wasn't right. But now, I had everything I needed. As I read through the documents, the anger began to rise. How could my son, my flesh and blood, do this to me? How could he let his wife control everything, from the house to the money? It was all a game to them. They had been playing me for years. But now, the game was over. I had spent so many years trying to hold our family together, trying to keep the peace, even when it felt like I was the only one making an effort. I had put my heart and soul into raising Richard, into making sure he had everything he needed. And what did I get in return? Betrayal, lies, manipulation. It was time for that to end. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not my dignity, not my home, and not my peace of mind. It was time for Richard and Victoria to face the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to let them keep treating me like I was invisible. I had worked too hard for everything I had. I had given too much. And now, I was going to take control. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. I wasn't going to let Richard and Victoria walk all over me anymore. It was time to make my move. I dialed the lawyer's number, my fingers trembling slightly. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hello," he said. "I need you to file a restraining order," I said, my voice steady but firm. "A restraining order?" he asked, clearly surprised. "Yes," I replied. "I need to protect myself. And I need you to help me make sure Richard and Victoria don't take what's rightfully mine." The lawyer paused for a moment, and I could hear him shuffling papers in the background. "I understand," he said finally. "I'll get started right away." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. I wasn't going to let Richard and Victoria get away with what they had done. I had spent too long being silent, too long letting them take advantage of me. But no more. The game had changed. And this time, I was in control. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Richard and Victoria would fight me every step of the way. But I had something they didn't: strength. I had the strength to stand up for myself, to take back what was mine, and to show them that I wasn't someone they could just push around. I wasn't just the woman they thought they could control. I was Martha Evans, and I would no longer be invisible. The days after the phone call felt different. I didn't feel the crushing weight I once had. Instead, I felt a quiet resolve growing inside me. It was like a light flickering back to life after years of darkness. I had always been the one to keep the peace, the one who smoothed over conflicts, who kept the family together. But the truth was, I had been holding everything together by a thread. And now, that thread had snapped. I had always believed that family should come first, that blood was thicker than water. But that was before I learned the hard way that love could be taken for granted, that loyalty could be betrayed. I wasn't going to allow myself to be a pawn in Richard and Victoria's game anymore. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering everything I needed to make sure this fight was one I would win. I went through every document, every piece of evidence I had been collecting over the past few months. The missing money, the false transfers, the lies Richard had been telling me. It was all right there in front of me. And as I looked through it, I couldn't help but wonder how I had let it all happen. How had I allowed myself to be treated like this for so long? But I didn't have time for regrets. I had to focus on what came next. I needed to make sure Richard and Victoria knew I wasn't going to back down. I called the lawyer again, this time to prepare the next steps. "I need you to file for full control of the house," I said. "And I need a separate account for my assets." The lawyer hesitated for a moment, probably surprised by my change in tone, but then he agreed. "We'll start the paperwork right away," he said. "And we'll make sure it's done correctly." "Good," I replied. "I won't let them take what's mine." The lawyer confirmed he would handle the details and have everything ready soon. I hung up, feeling a bit lighter. At least I wasn't alone in this anymore. As I went about my daily routine, I found myself planning more and more. I made sure that I was ready for the inevitable confrontation with Richard and Victoria. I knew they wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was no longer the weak, passive woman they thought I was. Every day, I could feel the shift inside me. The woman who had kept quiet for so long, who had sacrificed so much for her family, was no longer silent. She had found her voice, and she was going to use it. As the days passed, I continued to make preparations, but it wasn't just about the paperwork anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. The life I had built with Henry. The life I had sacrificed for my family. I wasn't going to let them destroy it. I didn't need to confront them yet. The lawyer was handling the legal side. But I knew the time would come when I would face Richard and Victoria again. And when I did, they would see me for who I truly was. I was done being invisible. I was done being the quiet mother, the one who was pushed aside when it was convenient. I was Martha Evans, and I was going to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The days continued to pass, but I didn't feel the same sense of helplessness that I had before. Instead, I felt empowered. The decision had been made. The wheels were in motion. The fight wasn't over yet, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't alone, and I would not be treated like a fool any longer. I had waited too long for this moment. It was time to show Richard and Victoria exactly how wrong they were to think they could take advantage of me. It was time for them to learn that the game had changed. And this time, I was the one in control. The days that followed were filled with a quiet intensity. I could feel the change within myself, like the calm before a storm, building up and gathering strength. I knew what I had to do. Richard and Victoria were going to learn that I was no longer the passive, silent woman they had grown used to. I was stronger now, more focused than ever. The lawyer had filed the necessary documents, and soon, I would have control over my assets, my life, and everything they had tried to take from me. But it wasn't just about legal papers or money. It was about showing Richard that I wasn't someone he could dismiss so easily. He had grown so distant from me over the years, and I had let him. I had allowed myself to be silenced, thinking that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But now, everything had changed. I thought about all the moments I had let slide, all the times Richard had chosen Victoria over me, all the times I had smiled through my pain, pretending it didn't bother me. I thought about the way he had stood there, without an ounce of remorse, shouting that he would walk out if I got my share. That was the last straw. I wasn't going to let him treat me like that anymore. I had been a good mother, a loving wife, and yet, I had been discarded like I meant nothing. It wasn't just the will that hurt. It was the years of neglect, the years of feeling invisible. But now, I could see clearly. I could see how they had taken advantage of me. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I spent the next few days preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation. I didn't know when it would come, but I knew it was coming. Richard and Victoria would be furious when they found out what I had done. But I didn't care. The time for silence was over. The time for hiding was over. I had spent too many years pretending to be okay. Too many years keeping my feelings to myself. Now, it was time for them to hear my voice. I wasn't going to beg for their approval. I wasn't going to plead for their love. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. The day finally came when I received the call from my lawyer. "The documents are ready," he said. "You're all set." My heart raced. This was it. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I was going to confront them. I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me. I was going to take control of the situation, once and for all. I dressed in my best suit, the one that made me feel strong, confident. I wasn't the old Martha anymore. I was someone different now, someone who would not be pushed around. I drove to Richard's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The closer I got, the more my heart pounded. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I had prepared myself for this confrontation, but the nerves were still there. I parked the car and walked up to the door, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. I rang the bell, my pulse quickening. A moment later, Richard opened the door, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, his eyes cold. "Mom," he finally said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Both of you." He stepped aside, letting me in. I walked past him into the living room, where Victoria was sitting on the couch. She didn't look up at first, but I could feel her eyes on me as I sat down. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Richard said, his tone sharp. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm not here to take everything. I'm here to take back what's mine." Victoria's eyes narrowed, and she sat up straighter. "You're delusional," she sneered. "You're not entitled to anything." I looked at her, then at Richard. "You've both been playing me for years. I've let you, but not anymore." I paused for a moment, letting the silence settle in the room. "I've already taken the necessary steps to secure my future. The lawyer is handling everything. Your manipulation stops now." Richard's face turned red. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "I won't let you take everything from me." I shook my head. "You've already taken everything from me. But now, I'm taking it back." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope, holding it in front of him. "This is proof of everything you've done. The money you've stolen. The lies you've told." Richard stared at the envelope, his face falling. Victoria stood up, but I didn't let her interrupt. "You don't get to make the decisions anymore. I'm done being your pawn. This is my life, and I'm taking control of it. You can't push me around anymore." The tension in the room was palpable. Richard and Victoria exchanged a look, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in their eyes. "You think you've won," Richard said, his voice low. "But this isn't over." I stood up, walking towards the door. "No, Richard," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's over. For you, at least." I walked out of the house. The weight I had carried for so long finally lifted. I had taken back my power. I had fought for myself, and I had won. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The following days were filled with a sense of quiet triumph, but also an underlying tension that I could not shake. Richard and Victoria had not spoken to me since the confrontation, and I knew they were planning their next move. They were not the type to back down without a fight, but I was prepared for whatever came next. I wasn't the woman they thought I was. I wasn't just going to fade into the background again. I had fought for my right to be seen, to be heard, and I wasn't going to stop now. I spent the next few weeks focusing on my next steps, knowing that I had to remain calm and calculated. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my actions. Every move had to be strategic. Every word had to carry weight. I had already secured my financial future, and now it was about ensuring that Richard and Victoria could no longer control my life. The calls from the lawyer became more frequent, and I knew the paperwork was moving along, but it wasn't just about the legal side of things anymore. This had become personal. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about respect. It was about showing them that I was not someone to be dismissed. I had been nothing but patient, nothing but loving, but now I was done being their doormat. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had just finished my breakfast when I saw the name on the screen. It was the lawyer. My heart raced as I answered. "Martha, we've received a response," he said. "Richard and Victoria are challenging the documents. They're going to fight you on this." I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What are the next steps?" I asked, my voice steady. "We'll file for a court date," the lawyer replied. "But I need to be prepared for a long battle. They won't go down without a fight." I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "I'm ready," I said. "I won't let them get away with this." The conversation ended, and I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. Richard and Victoria were not going to back down easily, but I wasn't backing down either. I had come too far. I had fought too hard. And now, I was ready to finish what I had started. The days that followed were filled with meetings, phone calls, and late-night research. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. I had lived my life for everyone else, and now it was my turn to take control. I found myself becoming more confident, more assertive, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself. I was no longer the woman who had quietly accepted being pushed aside. I was the woman who had found her strength and was ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. The day of the court hearing arrived, and as I sat in the waiting room, I could feel the tension building. This was the moment I had been preparing for. Richard and Victoria would be sitting across from me, but this time, I wouldn't be the one feeling small. I wouldn't be the one feeling invisible. As the doors opened, and we were called into the courtroom, I stood up, my back straight, my head held high. I wasn't just a mother trying to get her fair share anymore. I was a woman who had reclaimed her life. The judge called the court to order, and as the proceedings began, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to let Richard or Victoria take it from me. The lawyer spoke on my behalf, laying out the evidence and showing how Richard and Victoria had been manipulating me for years. As the testimony unfolded, I could feel the weight of their lies starting to crumble. They had thought they could control me. They had thought I would just sit back and accept their betrayal. But they had underestimated me. And now, the truth was coming to light. Richard's face twisted with anger as the evidence piled up against him. Victoria, on the other hand, sat silently, her expression cold. She was trying to maintain her composure, but I could see the cracks starting to show. She knew, deep down, that she had lost. After what felt like hours, the judge finally spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence, and it is clear that the actions taken by Richard and Victoria were not in good faith," the judge said. "The court will rule in favor of Martha Evans." I sat there, stunned. The fight was over, and I had won. Richard and Victoria were not getting away with their manipulation. I had stood my ground, and I had come out on top. As I left the courtroom, a sense of relief washed over me. I had taken back control of my life. I had fought for myself, and I had won. Richard and Victoria might have tried to break me, but they hadn't succeeded. I was stronger than they had ever realized. I wasn't the woman they thought I was. I was a force to be reckoned with, and from now on, I would never let anyone take advantage of me again. The weeks after the court ruling felt like a distant dream, almost surreal. Richard and Victoria were no longer the powerful figures they once seemed to be. I had seen the shift in their faces the moment the judge announced his decision. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. But the victory didn't come without its consequences. I could feel the coldness between me and Richard growing. He stopped calling. Victoria, of course, never reached out. But that didn't matter. I wasn't looking for their approval anymore. I had spent too long hoping for a love that wasn't there, Too long trying to fix a broken relationship that couldn't be fixed. It was over. What mattered now was my peace of mind. I spent the next few weeks rediscovering parts of myself I had long neglected. I started visiting old friends, going to places I loved, and even picking up hobbies I hadn't had time for in years. The house, which had once felt so empty, now felt like a sanctuary. I filled it with memories, not of what was lost, but of what was still to come. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. It was Richard. I stood up slowly, unsure of what to expect. Was he here to apologize? Was he going to try and make amends? As I walked toward the door, I reminded myself that I no longer needed validation from him. I opened the door, and there he was, standing on the porch with a look on his face I couldn't quite read. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice softer than I expected. "We need to talk." I studied him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had been the one to shut me out for so long. But now, here he was, standing in front of me, asking for a conversation. "What do you want to talk about, Richard?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. I know I've made mistakes," he said, looking down at his shoes. "I've hurt you and I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix it." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Richard the first remembered. The Richard the first knew would never have admitted fault. "Why now?" I asked, my voice still steady. "Why after everything? After everything you and Victoria did to me?" He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with regret. I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't see it then. But after everything that's happened, after seeing how strong you've become, I realize I've been selfish. I don't want to lose you, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. I stood there, feeling a mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to reach out, to forgive him, to heal the broken parts of our relationship. But another part of me knew better. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give away so easily anymore. "Richard," I said, my voice calm, but with a certain finality. "I don't need your apology. I needed you to be there when it mattered, and you weren't. I needed you to see me, to treat me with respect, and you didn't. You can't undo that." He looked down again, guilt written all over his face. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words that would close this chapter for good. "I've spent my whole life making excuses for you, for Victoria. But not anymore. I'm not here to be anyone's second choice. I'm not here to be invisible. I am Martha Evans, and I've learned that I don't need anyone's approval to be who I am." Richard didn't speak for a moment. He just stood there, looking at me, his expression shifting between regret and something else, maybe understanding. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said finally. "But I hope that one day, we can find a way to start over." I nodded slowly, my mind made up. "Maybe," I said quietly. "But that's not today." And with that, I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. The weight that had once held me down, that feeling of being trapped by my own family's expectations, began to lift as I moved further into my home. For the first time, I felt free. I wasn't bound by their demands anymore. I wasn't defined by their mistakes. I was Martha Evans, a woman who had reclaimed her life, and no one could take that from me. The next few weeks passed quietly. I didn't hear from Richard again, and I didn't expect to. I had made my peace with it. I had given him the chance to apologize, to take responsibility for his actions. And now, it was up to him whether he would follow through. But I wasn't going to wait around for it. I had my own life to live. I didn't need to hold on to a past that had only brought me pain. The future was mine to shape. I had learned that I could be strong on my own, that I didn't need anyone else to define me. The woman who had been pushed aside for so long had found her voice again. And nothing, not even Richard, could take that away from me. It had been a few months since the court ruling, and life had slowly returned to a new sense of normalcy. I woke up each day with a sense of purpose, my feet firmly planted in the present, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. The house felt different now, peaceful, quiet, almost like it had found its balance again. There was no longer the constant fear of betrayal or manipulation. It was just me, my space, and the quiet hum of my thoughts. I had taken the steps to protect myself, to ensure that what was mine would remain mine, but I hadn't expected to feel so calm. I had fought for so long, against the odds, against my own son, and now it felt like the storm had finally passed. But still, there was something lingering, a feeling I couldn't shake. As much as I had won, as much as I had proven my strength, There was a part of me that still longed for the family I once had. I had spent so many years building it, nurturing it, only for it to fall apart in front of me. The pain of that loss was still there, deep down. I couldn't deny it. Richard's absence in my life left a hole that nothing seemed to fill. Victoria, too, though she was a constant reminder of everything I had lost, left me with a sense of emptiness. I had given them everything, and they had taken it all. But now it was over. I had taken control, I had stood up for myself. And I had won. As the weeks went by, I found myself growing more comfortable in this new life. I started spending more time doing things I loved, things I hadn't allowed myself to do for years. I took up gardening again, something I hadn't done since Henry passed away. It was always something we enjoyed together, but now it felt like a way to reconnect with myself. I planted roses, just like the ones we had in our garden when we were young, when the world seemed a little less complicated. I spent afternoons sitting outside, sipping tea, letting the sunlight warm my face. It felt like a quiet rebellion, a way of taking back the peace I had lost. But even as I embraced this new sense of freedom, I knew the day would come when I would have to face Richard again. The guilt, the remorse, the fractured relationship, it wasn't something I could simply ignore forever. As much as I had wanted to let go of the past, I knew that part of healing would be facing it head-on. I wasn't sure when or how it would happen, but I could feel it coming. One evening, as I sat on the porch, I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't move. I didn't know what to expect this time. Was it Richard? Was he finally ready to make amends? Or was it just another attempt to manipulate me? I stood up slowly and walked to the door. As I opened it, I saw him standing there, looking hesitant but determined. Richard. His face was drawn, his eyes tired. For the first time in a long time, he didn't look like the man I had once known. He looked vulnerable. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't say anything at first. I just studied him, trying to gauge whether this was another one of his attempts to win me over, or if he was truly remorseful. "I've been thinking about everything," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I need you to know that I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. He stood there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes not quite meeting mine. It was a far cry from the arrogant man who had shouted at me in the courtroom, the one who had walked away from me without a second thought. "Why now?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Why after everything? Why after everything you and Victoria did to me?" He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "I don't know," he said. "I guess I was too proud, too angry to see what was really going on. But seeing you stand up for yourself, seeing how strong you've become, made me realize how wrong I was." There was a pause, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so many years holding on to this idea of family, this hope that one day, things would be different. But now, I realized I couldn't keep waiting for them to change. I couldn't keep forgiving the same mistakes over and over. "Richard," I said slowly, "you've hurt me. You and Victoria both. And I won't pretend it didn't hurt. But I've moved on. I can't go back to the way things were." He nodded, the understanding in his eyes a stark contrast to the anger I had once seen there. "I get it," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that." I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I just looked at him. The pain that had once been so overwhelming was now a dull ache. I realized, in that moment, that it didn't matter if he was sorry. It didn't matter if he wanted forgiveness. What mattered was that I had learned to live without him, without Victoria, without the constant drama that had been my life for so long. I had found my peace, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. "You're free to go," I said softly, my voice steady. "But I'm not going to hold on to this anymore. I'm done waiting for you to change." Richard stood there for a moment, as if weighing my words. Then he nodded, turning away and walking back to his car. I watched him leave. But for the first time, I didn't feel the ache I once did. I didn't feel the desire to fix things, to make things right. I had finally accepted that some things were beyond repair. I closed the door, quietly behind me, letting out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I was free, and this time, I was going to keep it that way. Months passed, and life, for the most part, had settled into a calm routine. The house was quieter, the spaces feeling more spacious, more my own. I had spent so much time fighting for everything, for respect, for peace, for control. And now, With Richard and Victoria out of the picture, I could finally breathe. But even with everything that had changed, there was still something inside me, a quiet whisper that lingered at the back of my mind. It wasn't regret, and it wasn't fear. It was more like the last remnants of hope, fading slowly, but still present. I had lived for so long trying to piece together something that was never meant to be. Family. I wanted it to work. I wanted us to be whole again. But that dream was slipping further away, and I had to face the truth that some things were never going to be fixed. I woke up one morning to a message from my lawyer. The final settlement had gone through. The house, the money, everything was secure. There was no longer any threat of losing what was mine. The weight of it all, the uncertainty that had consumed me for so long, had been lifted. But when I thought about it, I realized that I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't happy. I was free, yes, but I was also alone. The emptiness that came with this newfound freedom felt strange. I thought about the life I used to have, the life I had built with Henry, with Richard, with the family that had once meant everything to me. And I realized that as much as I had fought for myself, as much as I had stood up for my rights, I couldn't fill the space that had been left behind. That was the hardest part. Moving forward meant leaving behind the hope that things would ever be the same. It meant accepting the loss, not just of the people I loved, but of the family dynamic that had once defined me. But that wasn't a reason to fall apart. That wasn't a reason to give up. I had found strength in the fight. I had learned to stand on my own. And now it was time to truly live. I went through the motions of my daily routine, but there was a subtle shift. The house wasn't just a place I stayed. It was a place where I belonged. It was mine, in every sense of the word. I began taking long walks around the neighborhood, spending time with friends I had neglected over the years. I focused on the little things, gardening, reading, watching the sunset from the porch. Slowly, I started to remember who I was before all the pain. The woman who loved life, who found joy in the small moments. I began to reclaim that. There were still moments of sadness, of course. Moments when I would catch myself wondering what had happened to Richard, wondering if things could have been different. But those moments became less frequent. I had learned to let go of the past, to accept that some things were never meant to be. Life had taught me that lesson the hard way. And now, I was going to live in the present. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch again, looking out at the stars. It had become my favorite time of day, the quiet stillness, the way the world felt at peace for just a few moments. I thought about all the changes I had gone through, the pain, the loss, the struggle, and I realized something. It wasn't the outcome of the fight that mattered most. It wasn't the house, the money, or even the victory over Richard and Victoria. What mattered was that I had learned how to fight for myself. I had learned to reclaim my own life, my own peace. I wasn't defined by the people who had hurt me, by the family that had let me down. I was Martha Evans, and I had the power to decide who I was and what I wanted from life. And for the first time in a long time, I was at peace with that. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to come and fix things, to come and make it right. I had already done that for myself. I was going to keep moving forward, to keep living. And maybe one day, when I least expected it, I would find a new kind of family, a family built, not on blood, but on the people who truly saw me for who I was, who loved me for the woman I had become. But for now, I was content. I had fought the fight, and I had won. Now, I was going to live the life I deserved, the life I had earned. And that was enough.